The fire had been dead for 6 hours. Frost had crept across the inside of every cabin window in the valley. Water froze solid in the buckets. Breath hung in the air like smoke that would not rise. 50 degrees below zero outside. Colder still in the corners, where men slept curled against their wives, praying the last coals would hold until dawn. Every cabin in the valley was losing the fight against the cold that night. Every cabin except one, on a slight rise above the frozen creek, in a strange overbuilt structure that half the valley had laughed at all summer long. A man named Sten stood barefoot on his own wooden floor. And the floor was warm, not warm from a fire, because the fire had gone out at midnight. Warm from something else, something he had built into the ground itself. Something that would not have existed if a certain terrible thing had not happened to him a year before. By dawn, a neighbor woman would come pounding on his door in the killing cold, carrying a child who was not breathing right. And Sten would understand, finally, what he had really built. Not a cabin, not an experiment, not a monument to his grief. Promise, kept a year too late for the two people he loved most in the world. Kept just in time for someone else's little girl. This is the story of the floor that remembered her. Wyoming Territory, spring of 1848. Sten was a Swedish carpenter turned trapper turned husband turned father. In that order, in that speed, because life on the frontier did not wait for a man to decide what he wanted to be. He had come to the valley in the spring of 1846, with his wife Malin, and a wagon full of tools. Malin was 29, dark-haired, quiet in the way that some women are quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they choose their words the way other people choose their prayers. She had come from Skåne, in the south of Sweden, where her family had farmed the same land for 6 generations. She married Sten in a small Lutheran church in Minnesota. She followed him west without one complaint. And she carried their daughter Marit inside her body across 2,000 miles of wagon ruts and river crossings. Marit was born in the cabin Sten built with his own hands. October of 1845. She was small. So small the midwife wrapped her in a piece of Malin's own wedding shawl, because the baby blanket was too large. She cried once. Then she looked at her father with dark, serious eyes, and she stopped crying, as if she had already decided the world was going to be all right, and she did not need to make a fuss about it. Sten had never known a love like that. He thought he had. He had loved Malin from the first time he saw her at a church supper in a river town on the Mississippi. He had loved his mother in Sweden, though he had left her 30 years old, and never seen her again. He had loved his brother Anders, who died of fever in the Minnesota woods. But this was different. This was watching a small hand curl around his thick, calloused finger, and knowing all the way down to the bones of him, that he would die for this creature, that he would kill for her, that every breath he took, from that day forward would be a breath spent making the world a little safer for her small, dark, serious eyes. By the summer of 1848, Marit was almost 3. She walked, she talked, she followed her mother everywhere like a small, stubborn shadow. She called her father Papa, and her mother Mor, and she sang songs in Swedish that Malin taught her while they hung laundry. The cabin was small, 16 feet by 20, log walls chinked with mud, one window covered in oiled paper, a dirt floor packed hard from use, a stone fireplace on the north wall that ate with the way a hungry man eats bread. It was adequate. That was the word for it. Adequate shelter, adequate warmth, adequate protection against the mountain winters that killed the careless and the unlucky in equal measure. Sten had built it himself with help from 2 neighbors. It had taken 5 days. That was standard. That was how cabins were built in the high country. Fast, strong enough, warm enough as long as the fire burned. Every man in the valley lived in a cabin like it. Every family survived winter the same way. You kept the fire alive. You fed it through the night. You woke every few hours to add wood. You wrapped yourself in every blanket you owned. And in the morning, if the fire had held, you were still breathing. Most mornings the fire held. Most. In the summer of 1848, Sten received a letter. The letter came from a river town on Lake Superior. It was written in the hand of a woman named Astrid Nyberg, who was his brother Anders' widow. Anders had died 2 winters back. Astrid had raised their daughter Sigrid alone, until the previous spring, when a cough had settled into her chest and refused to leave. Astrid was dying. The letter said so plainly the way frontier women wrote things when they had no time for softness. She wrote that she would be dead by autumn. She wrote that Sigrid was 12 years old, and that there was no one else. No grandparents, no aunts on her side, no one but Sten. She wrote, "If you cannot take her, I will send her to the county home. But she is a good girl. She is quiet. She reads. She will not be a burden." Sten read the letter twice. Then he handed it to Malin. Malin read it once. She folded it. She placed it on the table. She looked at Sten across the cabin, and she said one word. Yes, that was all. That was the entire conversation about taking a grieving 12-year-old girl into their home 2,000 miles from the only life she had ever known. Yes, because Malin was that kind of woman. Because there was never a question in her mind about what a person did when a child had nowhere else to go. Because she had already, in the space of one folded letter, made room in her heart for a niece she had never met. Sten wrote back that same night. Sigrid arrived in September. She came by wagon with a trader named Ekdal who was headed west, with supplies for the trading post. He delivered her to the valley the way a man delivers a package. Careful, polite, relieved to hand her over. He said she had not spoken more than 10 words the entire journey. He said she had cried at night, when she thought no one could hear her. He said her mother had died in July. Sten paid the trader. He shook the man's hand, and he watched Sigrid climb down from the wagon, with a small canvas bag in her hand, and eyes that had seen too much for 12 years old. She was tall for her age, thin, dark hair like her father Anders had been, pale skin. She looked at Sten and did not smile. She did not cry. She did not hug him. She just looked, the way animals look at other animals when they are trying to decide if they should run. Malin came out of the cabin. She had flour on her apron and Marit on her hip. Marit was almost 3 by then. She had her thumb in her mouth. She stared at the strange tall girl. Malin walked straight to Sigrid. She did not hesitate. She did not speak. She just knelt down in the dirt in front of her niece and opened her arms. And Sigrid, something broke in her face. Just for a moment, a crack in the wall, and she stepped into Malin's arms and put her face in Malin's neck. And Malin held her, and she did not say anything. She just held her. For a long time, Marit watched from Malin's hip. Marit reached out with her small hand and touched Sigrid's dark hair, gently, the way she touched flowers in the meadow. Sten stood in the yard and watched his wife and his daughter and this strange broken girl who was suddenly his responsibility. And he felt something shift in his chest. Something rearrange itself, because a house that had held 3 now held 4, and there was no going back. Sigrid did not speak for 6 days. She ate what Malin put in front of her. She slept on the pallet Sten made for her by the fireplace. She helped with chores when Malin asked. On the 7th morning, Malin was kneading bread on the table. Marit was on the floor with a wooden spoon and a bowl, pretending. Sigrid sat by the fire, with a piece of mending in her lap that she had not touched. Marit stood up. She walked to Sigrid. She held out the wooden spoon. She said, "For you." Sigrid took the spoon. She looked at the spoon. She looked at Marit. And she said very softly, in a voice like a bird testing its wings, after a long winter, "Tack." "Thank you," in Swedish. Malin stopped kneading. She did not turn around. She just stood there with her hands in the dough. And Sten, who had been mending harness by the window, put down his awl. Marit clapped her small hands. She laughed. She said, "Varsågod. You are welcome." And Sigrid smiled. Just once. Just for a moment. But it was enough. It was enough for Sten to know that this child, this grieving child, who had lost everything and been sent across a continent to strangers, was going to live. She was going to be all right. It would take time. It would take patience. But she was going to live. He looked at Malin's back. Malin's shoulders were shaking. She was crying into the bread dough. Silent. Grateful. The way she cried, when she was too full of feeling to make any sound at all. Sten went outside. He stood in the yard. He looked up at the mountains that ringed the valley. He had a wife he loved past reason. A daughter who was the sun in his sky. A niece who was learning one small word at a time how to be held again. He had, in that moment, everything a man could ask for. Which was why what happened next was so unbearable. The winter of 1848 came early. By the first week of November, snow had fallen 3 times and stayed. By the middle of the month, the valley was locked in white. By the beginning of December, the temperatures had settled into the killing cold. 20 below at dawn, 10 below at midday if the sun came out, 30 below at night, sometimes 40. The fire burned constantly. Sten had cut and stacked 11 cords of wood through the summer and fall. He had thought it was too much. Malin had said no. Malin had said cut more. Malin had grown up on a Skåne farm, where her grandmother had taught her that a woman's first job in winter was to count the wood pile and worry about it. Every day, without stopping, Sten had cut 2 more cords. By December 5th he was glad he had. They fell sick on the same afternoon. Malin and Marit. Both of them. It was as if the cold had reached through the walls of the cabin and touched them both at the same moment. Malin coughed first. Standing at the table kneading dough. She coughed. She put her hand to her chest. She frowned. Sten looked up from the trap he was repairing. Are you well? It is nothing. Which is what she always said. Which is what wives on the frontier always said. Because they did not have time to be sick. Because there was no one to take their place. Because if they stopped, everything stopped. Malin coughed again. She kept kneading. An hour later Marit sneezed. Then she coughed. She coughed the small dry cough of a small child. She looked up at her mother, with those dark serious eyes, and she said, More. Aunt I Halsen. Mother. My throat hurts. Malin knelt beside her daughter. She put her hand on Marit's forehead. She held it there for a long moment. Then she looked up at Sten across the cabin. And Sten saw the fear in her face. He had never seen fear in Malin's face. Not once in 5 years of marriage. Not when the wagon axle broke on the plains. Not when the wolves came near the cabin in the first winter. Not when she gave birth alone, with only an old midwife who spoke no Swedish and no English. But he saw fear now. She is warm, Malin said. How warm? Warm. That was all she said. But Sten understood. By that evening, both of them were burning with fever. Sigrid worked without being asked. She heated water. She wrung out cloths and laid them on Malin's forehead and Marit's small hot face. She stirred the broth that Sten made from dried venison. She fed the fire. She moved through the cabin the way a girl moves, who has watched her own mother die of a cough that started small. She did not speak, but she did not need to speak. Sten watched her carry a bowl to Malin's bedside. He watched her lift Malin's head and hold the bowl to her lips. He watched the care in her hands. The care of a child who had done this before. The care of a child who knew what was coming. He put his hand on Sigrid's shoulder. She did not flinch. She did not lean into it. She kept holding the bowl for Malin. But he felt her breathing steady under his hand. That was all he could offer her. That was all any of them could offer each other. By the second night Marit was worse. Her small body burned. Her breathing was shallow and fast, like a bird's breathing. She whimpered in her sleep. She called for her mother even, though her mother was 3 feet away and dying of the same fever. Sten held his daughter through the night. He walked with her in his arms. He sang to her the songs his own mother had sung in Sweden 50 years before. He wet her lips with water. He prayed. He was not a praying man, but he prayed. He prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in, and he asked. He asked for one thing. He asked for his daughter to live. Malin lay on the bed and watched him walk. She could barely speak, but she watched him. Her dark eyes never left him. At one point she said his name, just his name. Sten. He turned. He came to the bedside with Marit in his arms. Malin lifted her hand. She touched Marit's cheek. She touched Sten's hand. She did not say anything else. She just looked at both of them for a long time. Then she closed her eyes. Sten did not know it then, but that was the last time Malin was fully awake. The night of December 10th was the coldest night of the winter so far. The thermometer that hung outside the cabin door had frozen at 40 below and stopped working. Sten did not need a thermometer to know. He could feel it in the way the cold pressed against the walls. In the way the fire had to work to keep the air breathable. In the way frost formed on the inside of the window paper even with the fire burning hard. He had been awake for 40 hours. 40 hours. He had not slept since Malin first coughed on the afternoon of December 8th. He had walked and rocked and sung, and fed the fire and boiled water, and changed cloths and prayed and waited. Waited for the fever to break. Waited for a sign. The sign did not come. Marit was worse. Her small chest rattled when she breathed. Her lips were blue at the edges. Her small hands were curled tight against her chest, and Sten could not straighten them no matter how gently he tried. Malin was worse too. She had stopped trying to speak. She lay very still, and her breathing was slow and deep and wrong. Wrong in a way Sten did not want to name. Sigrid had fallen asleep an hour before, curled on her pallet by the fire. She had cried herself to sleep. Silent tears. The tears of a child who knew she was watching it happen again. Sten sat by the fire. He had Marit in his arms. He was going to hold her all night. He had decided that. He was going to hold her until dawn. Because if he held her, she could not die. Because a father who holds his daughter tight enough can keep her breathing. That was what he told himself. That was the lie he needed to keep going. The fire was low. He needed to add wood. He looked at the wood box. It was almost empty. He had been burning through wood at twice the normal rate for 2 days. There were 4 logs left in the box. For large logs, pine, dry, they would burn. He needed to get up. He needed to put Marit down. He looked at his daughter in his arms. She was sleeping, finally sleeping. Her small chest rose and fell, rose and fell. He decided he could not put her down. Not yet. He would rest for just a moment. Just a moment. And then he would get up and add the wood. He closed his eyes. Just for a moment. The last thing he remembered thinking was that the fire would hold. The fire would hold. He had time. He was wrong. He woke to gray light. That was the first wrong thing. The gray light of dawn was coming through the window paper. He should not have been able to see it. He should have been awake, adding wood, watching Marit, watching Malin. He should not have been asleep. He was cold. That was the second wrong thing. He was cold. His face was cold. His hands were cold. His whole body was cold in a way he had not been cold inside a cabin in 2 years. The kind of cold that meant the fire. The fire. He looked at the fireplace. The fire was dead. Not low. Not smoldering. Not reduced to coals a man could revive with kindling and breath. Dead. The 4 logs had burned through. He did not know how. He did not know when. He must have added them in his sleep. Or maybe he had never added them. Maybe he had only meant to. Maybe the fire had been dying while he sat there thinking about adding wood. He did not know. He would never know. He looked down at Marit in his arms. Marit was not breathing. He does not remember standing up. He does not remember laying his daughter on the table. He does not remember crossing the cabin to the bed, where Malin was. But he must have, because he was standing over her. He was standing over his wife, and he was touching her face. And her face was cold. and her eyes were half open, and the pupils were fixed, and her chest was not moving, and it had not been moving. For how long? For how long? He did not know. He said her name. Malin. He said it again. Malin. He said it a third time. She did not answer. She would never answer. Not ever again. Not in this life. Not in the world, where a man could fall asleep by the fire for 4 hours, and wake up to find that everything he loved had gone somewhere else. Somewhere he could not follow. Somewhere the cold had taken them while he slept 3 feet away, and did nothing. Nothing. Because he was tired. Because he was human. Because he had closed his eyes for just a moment. He sat down on the floor beside the bed. He did not know how long he sat there. The gray light got brighter. Somewhere outside, a bird called. Somewhere in the valley, other cabins had smoke rising from their chimneys. Other families were waking up to another cold morning. Fathers were adding wood to fires that had held through the night. Mothers were putting pots of water on to heat. Children were climbing out of beds and complaining about the cold and being told to hush and get dressed. Life was continuing, everywhere except in this cabin, where a wife lay dead in a bed, and a daughter lay dead on a table, and a man sat on the floor and did not move. Sigrid found him. She woke on her pallet, and she saw him sitting on the floor. She saw the fire out. She saw Malin's still face. She saw Marit on the table. She understood in less time than it takes to draw a breath. She did not scream. She did not cry. She had done all her screaming and crying already. When her father died, when her mother died, she had used up her allotment. There was nothing left for this. She walked across the cabin. She sat down on the floor beside Sten. She took his hand. She just sat there with him, 12 years old, holding the hand of her uncle, who had lost everything, because she was the only other person left in the world who understood what it felt like to be the one who was left behind. They sat like that for a long time. Outside, the sun rose over the eastern ridge. Bright, cold, utterly indifferent. Halvar Björk arrived at midday. He was Sten's nearest neighbor. He lived 2 miles south with his wife Bottle and their 3 children. He had ridden over because he had not seen smoke rising from Sten's chimney all morning. And in weather like this, no smoke was a bad sign. He tied his horse to the post outside. He walked to the cabin. He knocked on the door. Sigrid opened it. Halvar looked down at the 12-year-old girl standing in the doorway. He saw her face. He saw what was behind her eyes. He said, "Where is your uncle?" Sigrid stepped back. She did not answer. She did not need to answer. Halvar walked into the cabin. He was a big man, 42 years old, Norwegian by birth, though he had lived in America for 20 years. He had buried a child of his own once, back in Wisconsin. A boy named Eric, who had drowned in a creek. He knew what dead looked like. He knew what grief looked like. He saw Sten sitting on the floor beside the bed. He saw Malin. He saw the small, still shape on the table. He took off his hat. He stood there for a moment. Then he crossed the cabin and knelt beside Sten. He said, "Sten." Sten did not look up. "Sten, look at me." Sten looked up. His eyes were empty, not sad, not angry, empty. The way a house is empty when the family has moved out and taken the furniture. Halvar said, "I am going to get the others. We will help you. Do you hear me? We will help you." Sten did not answer. Halvar put his hand on Sten's shoulder. He squeezed. Hard. Hard enough to hurt. "Sten, do you hear me?" Sten nodded. Once, Halvar stood up. He looked at Sigrid. "Can you feed the fire, child?" Sigrid nodded. "Then feed it. I will be back with the others by nightfall." He left. Sigrid went to the fireplace. She raked out the cold ashes with the iron poker. She took kindling from the box. She built a new fire the way Malin had taught her in September. She used the flint and steel. She struck sparks. She blew gently on the tinder. She fed it small twigs, then larger sticks, then a log. The fire caught. She fed it more wood. She sat down on the hearth. She wrapped her arms around her knees. She stared into the flames. Sten sat on the floor beside the bed. He did not move. The cabin began to warm. Too late. They buried them together. The ground was frozen 4 feet down. Halvar and 2 other neighbors, a Norwegian named Nils Hagen and a Swede named Rasmus Ekdahl, helped Sten dig the grave. Took 3 days. 3 days of building fires on the burial site, letting them burn down to coals, scraping away the ash, digging as far as they could into the softened earth, then building another fire. Sten worked without speaking. He dug when it was his turn to dig. He rested when it was another man's turn. He ate what bottle Björk brought over from her cabin. He did not thank her. He could not find the words. She did not seem to need them. Sigrid stayed at the cabin. She kept the fire alive. She sat with the bodies, which the men had wrapped in canvas, and laid in the cold back corner of the cabin, where it was near freezing but out of the weather. She did not sleep more than an hour at a time. She woke to feed the fire. She sat back down. She stared at the 2 shapes under the canvas. On the 4th day, the grave was deep enough. They lowered Malin first, wrapped in canvas. Sten and Halvar took her weight. She was so light. Sten had not expected her to be so light. He had carried her in his arms in the 1st year of their marriage. He had carried her to bed on her wedding night. He remembered her weight. She had not weighed this little then. Then Marit. Marit was very small. Sten took her alone. He knelt at the edge of the grave. He held his daughter against his chest one last time. He put his face against her wrapped face. He whispered something. No one heard what he said. Then he laid Marit beside her mother. He covered them with earth. The men helped him. They worked in silence. The only sound was the sound of frozen dirt hitting canvas. And then, after a while, the softer sound of dirt hitting dirt. When it was done, Halvar put his hand on Sten's shoulder. Come, Halvar said. Come with us. Bodil has made supper. You should not be alone tonight. The girl should not be alone. Sten shook his head. Sten. No. Halvar looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. He knew when a man could not be moved. He knew when to leave a man to his own dark. I will come tomorrow, Halvar said. I will bring food. I will not stay. I will just come. Sten nodded. The men left. Sten stood beside the grave for a long time. Sigrid stood beside him. The wind came down off the mountain and pulled at their coats. The light was starting to fail. Finally, Sigrid tugged his hand. He looked down at her. She did not speak. She just tugged his hand and looked at the cabin. He let her lead him home. The winter that followed was the longest winter of Sten Nyberg's life. He kept the fire burning. That was what he did. That was all he did that had any meaning. He got up every 2 hours at night to add wood. He never let it go out. Not once. Not for a single hour. He would have burned every log he had cut before letting it go out. Because if it went out, it would mean he had done it again. It would mean the last thing he had, the only thing left, was gone too. Because Sigrid was in that cabin. Sigrid was sleeping in the bed that had been Malin's. And Sten would have burned the walls before letting Sigrid freeze in that bed. Sigrid did not speak. Not one word. Not in Swedish. Not in English. Not to Sten. Not to Bodil Björk when Bodil came to visit. Not to Halvar. Not to anyone. She had spoken her last word on the day Malin died. Sten did not remember what it was. She had said something to him that morning before he found Malin. She had said something ordinary. Uncle, the bread is done. Or Uncle, the water is boiling. Something like that. And then Malin was dead. And Marit was dead. And Sigrid had stopped speaking. For a while, Sten tried to talk to her. He would say, Sigrid, are you hungry? She would nod or shake her head. He would say, Sigrid, are you warm enough? She would nod. She understood everything he said. She just did not answer with her voice. Her voice was gone, or hidden, or saved up for something else. Sten did not know. After a while, he stopped trying. He was too tired to try. In February, Sten thought about sending her back to Minnesota. He thought about it for 3 days. There was no one to send her to. That was the problem. Astrid was dead. His brother Anders was dead. Their parents were dead. There was a distant cousin named Hedvig in the Minnesota River country, who had children of her own. Sten could write to Hedvig. Hedvig might take Sigrid in. Or Sigrid could go to the county home. The county home, where children who had no one went, where they were fed and clothed and taught to work, where they slept in rows of narrow beds, where a 12-year-old girl who had already lost her father and her mother and her aunt and her small cousin would sleep among strangers and grow up alone. Sten thought about it. He decided he could not do it. Not because he was noble. Not because he loved her the way he had loved Marit. Not yet. He barely knew her. She had been in his cabin for 4 months. 3 of those months she had not spoken. He could not do it because if he sent her away, he would be the man who had let his wife and daughter die in the cold. And then sent his brother's orphan child away. He would be that man. And he would not survive being that man. Sigrid was his last thread. If he cut it, he would fall. So he did not cut it. He wrote back to Hedvig, who had written to him in January, after hearing the news. He wrote that Sigrid would stay. He wrote that he would raise her. He wrote that his brother's daughter had a home, with him for as long as she needed one. He did not tell Sigrid he had thought about sending her away. He never told her. He would carry that shame alone until the end of his life. Spring came slowly. March brought a few days above freezing. The snow began to melt on the south-facing slopes. Water dripped from the eaves of the cabin. The creek at the bottom of the valley began to run again under the ice. Sten walked up the hill to the graves in the 2nd week of March. He walked alone. Sigrid was at the cabin, mending a torn shirt that had been his brother's, which he had given to her, because it was too small for him and she needed something warm. The graves were under snow. Sten cleared the snow away with his gloved hands. 2 mounds. 1 large, 1 small. He stood beside them for a long time. He had not cried yet. Not in the cabin the morning he found them. Not at the burial. Not through the long dark winter. He had thought maybe he could not. Maybe something inside him had frozen the same way the ground had frozen, and it would take a long time to thaw. But now, standing on the hillside with the wind moving through the pines, and the small snow on the mounds, and the memory of Malin's dark eyes, and Marit's small hand curled around his finger. Now he cried. He knelt down in the wet snow. He put his hands on the small mound. The one that was Marit. He cried until his chest hurt. He cried the way a man cries, who has held it in too long. Loud, ugly, without dignity, because there was no dignity in this. There had never been any dignity in this. There was only a man on a hillside in Wyoming, with his hands on his daughter's grave. When he was finished, he sat back on his heels. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at Malin's mound. He said, out loud, in Swedish, Jag lover dig. I promise you, he said it again. Jag lover dig. Aldrig mer. I promise you, never again. He did not know yet what the promise meant. He did not know how a man was supposed to keep a promise like that in a country where cold killed people every winter and cabins were made of logs chinked with mud and fires went out because men were tired and human. He did not know, but he had promised. And Sten Nyberg was a man who kept his promises. He would find a way. He stood up. He walked back down the hill. Smoke was rising from his chimney. Sigrid had kept the fire alive while he was gone. She was standing in the doorway of the cabin when he came into the yard. She had been watching for him. He could see it on her face. She had been afraid he might not come back. He walked to her. He knelt down in front of her the way Malin had knelt down in front of her on the day she arrived. He said, Jag är hemma. I am home. Sigrid looked at him. Her face did not change. She did not answer, but she stepped forward. And she put her arms around his neck. And she held on. She held on for a long time, Sten held her back. And somewhere behind them, up on the hill, under the wet snow, a woman and a small girl lay side by side in the frozen earth. And a man had made them a promise. Spring was coming, and with spring the work would begin. March turned to April. The snow pulled back from the south-facing slopes. Water ran everywhere, under the ice on the creek, through the seams between the logs of the cabin, down the mountain in small brown rivers that carved fresh channels through the mud. The valley began to breathe again. Sten did not. He worked. He ran his trap lines. He skinned what he caught. He cured the hides. He cut wood for the following winter, though winter was months away. He mended the harness. He mended the fence. He mended everything that could be mended, except himself. Except the thing inside his chest that was not mending. That was not going to mend. That was going to sit there for the rest of his life, cold and heavy, the way a stone sits at the bottom of a river. Sigrid still did not speak. 5 months now. She followed him everywhere. That was the new thing. In February she had stayed at the cabin. In March she began to follow. She would put on her coat when he put on his. She would walk out into the yard behind him. She would stand and watch him work. She would not let him out of her sight. Sten understood. He was the last thing she had. The last human being in the world she could point to and say, "This one is mine." And she had already lost, in the space of a single winter, the last human being she had thought was hers before. She was not going to let it happen again. So he let her follow. He did not mind. He minded very few things in those first months after Malin. The promise did not leave him. He had said it on the hillside in the wet snow. Aldrig mer. Never again. At first the words had been the wild words of a man in grief. The kind of words a person says because they cannot survive the moment without saying them. Words a person forgets by morning. Except he did not forget. The words stayed. They sat in his chest beside the stone. But how? That was the question. That was the question he could not stop turning over. How did a man in Wyoming territory keep a promise like that? Cabins were made of logs. Fires burned or they did not. Men slept. Men got tired. Men made mistakes. And the cold was always waiting. Always. There was no fixing that. Was there? He began, without deciding to pay attention. To heat. To how heat moved. To what held it. To what let it go. He would notice, after supper, that the iron poker he had left near the fire was still warm an hour later. Not hot, but warm. Warmer than the air around it. He would touch it. He would think about it. He would put it down and go about his evening. He would notice that the stones of the fireplace, the ones ringed around the firebox, stayed warm for hours after the flames died. Sometimes into the morning. He could put his palm flat against them at dawn. Faint warmth. Still there. He would notice that a bucket of water, boiled at dusk and set on the hearth, was still tepid at breakfast. Things held heat differently. Some things a little. Some things a lot. Some things not at all. He had never thought about it before. Why would he have? In April he needed food. His stores had run low through the long winter. He had spent the season keeping the fire alive and mourning. He had not been a good trapper. He had what he had. And what he had was not enough to last him, and Sigrid to the trading post run in May. He needed vegetables. Halvar Bjork had a root cellar. Everyone in the valley knew about it. It was a proper one, dug into the hillside behind the Bjork cabin, 8 feet deep, lined with fitted stone. Halvar was proud of it the way some men are proud of a horse or a rifle. He had built it his second summer in the valley, and he had told anyone who would listen that no vegetable of his had ever frozen since. Sten rode over on a Tuesday morning. Sigrid rode behind him on the horse, her arms around his waist, her face pressed against his back. Halvar was in the yard splitting kindling. He saw them coming. He set down the axe. "Sten. Halvar. You have come for something. Vegetables. If you can spare." Halvar nodded. He was not a man of many words when it mattered. He glanced at Sigrid, who had climbed down from the horse and was standing quietly beside Sten's leg. He nodded to her too. She did not nod back. She did not look at him. Halvar did not seem to mind. He had raised 3 children. He knew about children who did not want to be looked at. "Come," he said. He led them around the back of the cabin, to the hillside, to the heavy wooden door set into the earth. He lifted the wooden latch. He pulled the door open. A gust of air came out. Sten stopped walking. The air was cool, but it was not cold. It was not the killing cold of the April morning outside, where the wind still cut through wool and where frost had covered the grass at dawn. It was cool, like a spring evening, like the inside of a spring house in Minnesota, where his mother had kept the milk. The air had a smell to it. Earth, old vegetables, something faintly sweet. Halvar stepped inside. He lit a small oil lamp on a peg beside the door. He turned back. "Come. It stays like this all winter. Never freezes. Never gets warm. Good for the potatoes." Sten stepped inside. Sigrid followed him. The cellar was maybe 10 feet square. The ceiling was curved. Fitted stone walls. Wooden shelves on 3 sides. Barrels of turnips. Crates of potatoes. Bundles of dried herbs hanging from pegs. A crock of pickled cabbage. And the air was the thing. Sten stood in the middle of the cellar. He could feel the temperature on his skin. 50 degrees. Maybe 45. Outside it was 32, if that. Not warm. Not cold. Stable. He said, "How?" Halvar looked at him. "How what? How does it stay? Like this?" Halvar shrugged. He had never really thought about it. It was just what root cellars did. That was the whole point of them. "The earth," Halvar said. "The earth holds it. Deep enough down, it never freezes. You dig deep enough, you get a place that stays the same all winter and stays the same all summer. My father built one like it in Norway. His father before him." Sten was not listening. Sten was thinking. Sten was thinking that if the earth could hold a temperature, if the earth could stay warm enough to keep potatoes from freezing when it was 40 below outside, if the earth could do that with no fire, with nothing, with just itself, then, he did not know what came after then. But something was there. Something was moving in his head. Something he did not have words for yet. Halvar was talking. Something about potatoes. Something about the pickled cabbage his wife had made last fall. Sten made himself listen. He made himself trade. 2 beaver pelts for a sack of potatoes, half a sack of turnips, a crock of the pickled cabbage. Halvar was fair. Halvar had always been fair. But when Sten walked out of the root cellar and into the cold April morning, the difference hit him like a slap. Warm air behind him, cold air in front. And no fire had made that warm air. Nothing had made it. It was just there. Sigrid was watching him. She had noticed. She always noticed. She had been looking at his face when he stood in the middle of the cellar, and she had seen something change in it. He looked down at her. He said, "Sigrid, can't do. Sigrid, did you feel that?" She nodded. Just a nod. But she had nodded fast. She had felt it too. The cool air that was not cold. The wrongness of it. The impossibility of it. Sten lifted the sack of potatoes onto the horse. He lifted Sigrid up behind. He climbed on himself. He rode home slowly. He was not thinking about supper. He was thinking about the earth. 3 weeks later, he went to the trading post. He needed coffee, salt, powder, lead, the things a man could not make and could not gather. He had his winter's furs, thin as they were. He would trade them for what he needed. He would come home. That was the plan. The trading post sat 40 miles east. 2 days on horseback if you pushed. He left Sigrid with Bottle Bjork. Bottle had insisted. Bottle had come over to the cabin on a Sunday afternoon and had sat with Sigrid at the table and had said to Sten in her flat plain way, "The child stays with me while you go. It is not a request." Sten had said thank you. He had ridden out on the following Tuesday. The trading post was a small settlement. a trading post, a blacksmith shop, a general store, a sawmill by the creek that had been built 3 summers back by a man named Rasmus Ekdahl. Sten did his trading first. He was efficient. He was quick. He did not linger. He did not want to talk. Men at the post came up to him and shook his hand and said they were sorry about Malin. He said thank you until his throat hurt. He did not want to say thank you anymore. When he was done with his trading, he walked to the sawmill. He did not know why. Or maybe he did know why. Maybe some part of him was still turning over the thing from the root cellar. Maybe some part of him was looking for the next piece of whatever it was. The sawmill was loud. The great vertical blade cut down through a pine log. Sawdust filled the air, fell like snow, coated the shoulders and hair of the man working the mill. Rasmus Ekdahl. Sten had met him once. Rasmus was the man who had delivered Sigrid in September, 7 months ago. He was a Swede, thin, sharp-faced, maybe 50 years old. He had a way of watching people that was not quite friendly and not quite unfriendly. Just watchful. He saw Sten in the doorway. He shut off the water gate. The blade slowed. Stopped. Nyberg. Ekdahl. You need lumber. No. Then why are you here? Sten hesitated. He could not explain why he was there. He was not there for anything he could name. He was there because of the piles of sawdust behind the mill. He had seen them when he rode up. Enormous. 6 of them. Some of them a summer old. Some of them older. Sawdust and shavings from years of mill work. And from the oldest one, in the cool morning air, he had seen steam rising. Steam. From sawdust. In April. Your piles, Sten said. The old ones. Rasmus looked at him. What about them? They are steaming. Yes. How? Rasmus wiped sawdust from his forehead with the back of his wrist. He came out of the mill. He walked with Sten around to the back. He gestured at the piles. They heat themselves, Rasmus said. Something in the wood. It breaks down inside. Makes heat. I have seen them steam in January, when everything else is frozen. Sten walked to the oldest pile. He put his hand on the surface. Cool. He pushed his hand in. 6 inches deep. Warm. He pushed deeper. To the wrist. To the elbow. Warm. Warmer than his own body. Warmer than a hand held near a candle. His hand came out with fine sawdust clinging to it, and the sawdust was warm to the touch, and the smell of it was rich and living and strange. He stood there. He looked at Rasmus. Rasmus was watching him with those watchful eyes. Sten said, It does not burn. No. It just holds. It holds. That is right. Could a man use it for something? Rasmus shrugged. For what? Sten did not answer. He did not know for what. Not yet. But he had felt the second thing now. He had felt the second thing that held heat when nothing was burning. The earth was 1. Sawdust was 2. He looked at the pile. He looked at the 6 piles. He looked at Rasmus. If I came back, Sten said, with a wagon, if I came back and took some of this, would you sell it? Rasmus laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud. A short, sharp bark of laughter. Sell you sawdust. Sten Nyberg. You want to buy my garbage. Would you sell? I will give it to you. Take all you can haul. You would be doing me a favor. I have been meaning to burn these piles for 2 years. Sten nodded. He did not smile. His face had forgotten how. But something in his chest was starting to. Something was starting. He walked back through the settlement, past the trading post, past the general store, toward the blacksmith shop. The forge was smoking. Heat rippled the air above the chimney. He could feel the warmth from 30 feet away. The blacksmith was a Norwegian named Mathias Sundman. Big man, late 50s, white beard, arms like tree trunks from a lifetime of hammering iron. He had been the settlement's smith since before the trading post itself was built. Sten stepped inside. The heat hit him like a wall. Mathias was at his anvil. He was shaping a horseshoe, orange metal glowing on the anvil, his hammer coming down, ringing, ringing. He looked up. He saw Sten. He nodded. He kept hammering. Sten waited. When Matthias was finished, he plunged the horseshoe into the water trough. The water erupted with steam. He set the horseshoe on a rack. He turned to Sten. You need something. To look. Look at what? Your forge. Matthias frowned. My forge. Yes. The old man tilted his head. Sten was not the first strange man who had ever walked into his shop. But he was a new kind of strange. Matthias had heard about Nyberg. Everyone had heard about Nyberg, the Swede in the valley, who had lost his wife and small daughter in December. Word traveled in the mountains. Grief traveled. Matthias set down his hammer. Look then. Sten walked to the forge. The fire had burned down, reduced to glowing coals. But the heat. He put his hand up. 6 feet away. He could feel it, like standing near an open oven. He walked closer. He crouched down. He looked at the stones. The forge was built from fitted stones. Dark gray, granite, some the size of a bread loaf, some larger. They were stacked tight, almost no mortar, just weight and fit. And they were black with soot and age. And they were warm. Warm not from the fire, because the fire was almost out. Warm from something else. Warm from having held fire for so long that the stones themselves had become the fire. Sten put his palm on one of the stones. He pulled it back. It was hot, actually hot, not fire hot, but hot enough that a man would not want to leave his hand there. And the fire in the forge was nothing but coals. He looked up at Matthias. Matthias was watching him. The old man had crossed his arms. You are the third man, Matthias said. Third what? Third man in 30 years to touch that stone and look at me like that. Both the other men are dead. Who were they? A Dane and a man from Kentucky. Both trying to build something. Both dead now. Neither of them ever came back to tell me what they built. Or if it worked. Sten stood up. How long do the stones stay warm? After I bank the fire. Overnight. If I bank it right. Sometimes I come in the next morning, and the stones are still warm enough to burn a man, if he touched them wrong. Overnight. Overnight. From coals. From nothing but coals. Matthias nodded. The stones remember, he said. My father used to say that, in the old country, a good forge is built from stone that remembers the fire. Sten stood there for a long time, looking at the stones, feeling the heat come off them. The fire was dead. The fire had been dead for an hour or more, and the heat was still coming. He said, What kind of stone? Heavy, dense, soft stone cracks. Granite is best. Basalt if you can get it. How thick? 8 inches. 12 where I could. Thicker is better. The more stone, the more it holds. Sten nodded. He said thank you. He walked out of the shop. He stood in the sunlight in the settlement road. 3 things now. Earth, sawdust, stone. 3 things that held heat when nothing was burning. 3 things that kept warmth in a world that wanted to be cold. 3 things that a man could put together. Maybe, if a man knew how. Sten did not know how. He was not an engineer. He was a Swedish carpenter turned trapper turned widower. He had no schooling in these things. He had no idea what he was doing. But he had the 3 things. And he had the promise. And he turned toward his horse. He was going to ride home. He was going to stop at the sawmill in a week and haul back sawdust. He was going to gather stones. He was going to something, but he could not shake the feeling that he was missing a 4th thing, that something was still hidden, that he had not yet found the last piece. He found it on a Tuesday afternoon in May. He was cleaning out Malin's things. He had been putting it off. For 5 months. He had not touched her clothes. He had not opened the small trunk at the foot of the bed. He had not moved a single thing that was hers. It had all sat exactly where she had left it on the morning of December 10th, gathering dust, waiting for a woman, who was never coming back to move it herself. But it was May, and Sigrid was outgrowing the one dress she had brought from Minnesota. She was growing. Her wrists stuck out of her sleeves. Her ankles showed below her hem. She needed a woman's dress cut down. She needed Malin's dresses. Sten opened the trunk. He sat on the floor beside it. He lifted out the dresses one by one. He remembered every one. The blue one she had worn to the church supper. The gray one she had worn on the wagon. The brown one she had worn every day. The one white one she had never worn since her wedding, folded flat at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper. He held the blue one to his face. Still smelled like her. Faintly, he put it down. He could not do this. He could not keep going. He was going to. He was going to. There was a book. At the bottom of the trunk. Under the white wedding dress. A small leather-bound book. The size of a man's hand. Brown leather. Worn at the corners. Tied with a piece of black ribbon. He had never seen it before. He picked it up. He untied the ribbon. He opened it. The pages were filled with Malin's handwriting. In Swedish, small careful letters. The way she wrote her letters. The way she had written the note she left on the table on their wedding day, that had said only, "I will meet you at the church at noon." He turned the pages. Recipes. Household notes. The dates when she had planted things in her garden. The names of the goats they had owned in Minnesota. A page of drawings of children's clothes. A page listing books she wanted to read. A page listing songs her grandmother had taught her. His hand was shaking. He turned to the last page. The last page that had writing on it. It was dated November of 1848, the month before she died. Written in her small careful hand. He read. He read it twice. He read it a third time to be sure. The page was about her grandmother's house. Her grandmother. Old Malin they called her. The elder Malin. His wife had been named for her. Old Malin had lived in a village in Skåne, in the south of Sweden. She had raised 9 children in a house she and her husband had built with their own hands in 1780. The house was called a jordkällare hus, an earth cellar house. It was built partly into a hillside. It had a stone foundation 2 feet thick. It had a floor of packed wood shavings and moss and pine needles. It had a raised wooden floor above the shavings. His wife had written. Moore said her grandmother's house was the warmest house in the parish. The winters in Skåne are cold. Not so cold as America, but cold. Old Malin's house never went below 50 degrees inside, even when the fire went out. The floor stayed warm through the night. She used to say the house held the fire even after the fire was gone. I want to build a house like that here, when we have saved enough. When Sten has time. I have asked him 3 times. He says he will listen when we have time. I am going to make him listen this winter. Sten put the book down on the floor. He put his face in his hands. She had told him. She had told him 3 times. 3 times she had asked him to sit down and listen to her about her grandmother's house. And he had said, when we have time, when we have time, when we have time. And they had never had time, because time had run out on the 10th of December, at some hour between midnight and dawn, in a cabin she had never wanted to live in, but had lived in without complaint because he was her husband, and she loved him. And she had known there was a better way. She had carried it inside her, in a small leather book at the bottom of a trunk, waiting for him to listen. And he had not listened, and she had died, and their daughter had died, because Sten Nyberg had not made time to hear his wife. He cried. He cried on the floor beside her trunk, with her small leather book in his hands, and her dresses spread around him, and his face buried against her blue dress that still smelled like her. He cried a long time. When he could see again, he read the book. He read every page. He read what she had written about her grandmother. He read what she had noted down about the way old houses were built in Skåne. Foundation of fitted stone, 2 feet thick or more, sunk into the ground. Cavity beneath the floor filled with wood shavings. pine needles, moss, charcoal to keep the mice away, wooden floor on joists 16 inches apart. She had drawn a diagram, a simple diagram, not to any scale, but clear. Anyone who could read a picture could see what it was. Stone below, insulation between, floor above, 3 layers. She had written under the diagram, Old Malin said the fire warms the stone during the day. The stone keeps the warmth for the night. The floor is warm to walk on even when the fire is dead. Sten sat on the floor. He read that sentence again. Even when the fire is dead. He knew then. He knew what he had been looking for. He knew what he was going to build. He knew what he was going to do with the rest of his life. He was going to build his wife's grandmother's house. Here, in Wyoming, in the killing cold of the American frontier. He was going to build the thing she had asked him to build. And he was going to build it so well and so strong that, when Sigrid slept in it, she would sleep the way children sleep who are not afraid. He was going to keep his promise. Because Malin was going to show him how. From the pages of a small leather book he had almost thrown away. From the grave. He went outside. Sigrid was in the yard. She was hanging out wet washing on the line. She was 13 years old. Her hair was in a long dark braid down her back. Her wrists stuck out of her sleeves. She saw him coming. She saw his face. She stopped what she was doing. She waited. Sten crossed the yard to her. He knelt down in the wet grass in front of her. He said, in Swedish, Jag vet vad jag ska bygga. I know what I am going to build. Sigrid looked at him. She waited. He held up the book. He said, Din master har lämnat mig anvisningar. Your aunt has left me instructions. Sigrid took the book from his hand. She opened it. She turned the pages. Slowly. She had never seen it before. She read her aunt's handwriting. She came to the diagram. She looked at the diagram for a long time. Then she looked up at Sten. Her eyes were bright. She did not speak. But she nodded. Once. Firm. Certain. She gave him back the book. She went back to hanging washing. Sten stood in the yard and watched his niece hang his dead wife's washing on the line. And behind them, up on the hill under the wildflowers that were just beginning to come up, through the last of the snow, a woman and a small girl lay side by side in the earth. And Sten Nyberg understood, finally, what he had to do with the rest of his life. He walked into the cabin. He got his shovel. He walked out to the rise beyond the old cabin. To the place he had chosen. He had chosen it days before, without quite admitting to himself what he was choosing it for. A rise, good drainage, full sun, a view of the graves on the hillside above. He drove his shovel into the ground. The point of the shovel struck rocky earth. He drove it again. He began to dig. Halvar Björk Road passed the site on a Tuesday in early June. He stopped his horse. He watched Sten for a long minute. Sten was in the trench, waist deep, throwing dirt onto a pile that already reached his shoulder. Sigrid was up top, sitting in the grass, sorting stones into piles. Small stones, medium stones, large stones. She had a system. Halvar sat on his horse. He watched. Finally he said, Sten, Halvar, what are you doing? Digging. I can see you are digging. Why are you digging? Foundation. For what? Cabin. Halvar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Sten, that is not a foundation. That is a hole. Sten threw another shovel of dirt. It will be a foundation. How deep? 2 feet. 2 feet. Around the whole perimeter. Halvar dismounted. He walked to the edge of the trench. He looked down. He looked up. He looked at Sten. Sten, a cabin needs cornerstones. Maybe a flat rock at each corner. You are digging like you are making. I do not know what you are making, but it is not a foundation. Sten kept digging. Halvar looked at Sigrid. Sigrid looked back at him. She held a stone in her hand and looked at him. Halvar shook his head slowly. He got back on his horse. He said, You need help, Sten. You should not be doing this alone. Not this. Not any of this. Come to supper tonight. Bottle has made stew. Thank you. No. Sten. Thank you. No. Halvar sat on his horse for a long moment. Then he rode away. Sten kept digging. The rumors began that same week. Halvar told his wife. His wife told her sister, who was passing through from the next valley. The sister told a trader. The trader told the men at the trading post. The men at the trading post told each other. Nyberg was digging a hole. Nyberg had lost his mind. The grief had gotten to him. He was digging what looked like a grave, or a fortress, or a swimming pond. Nobody knew. He was talking to himself. He was not eating. He had that girl of his, that mute niece, sitting in the dirt watching him dig for hours. It was not right. Someone should do something. They came out to look. Rasmus Ekdahl rode over from the trading post in the second week of June, 40 miles just to see. He looked at the trench. He shook his head. He said, Nyberg, you are wasting time. Cabin. Season. Winter comes fast. Sten said, I know when winter comes. Nils Hagen rode over. Nils was a plain man. He looked at the trench for a long time. He said, Sten, if you need help building a proper cabin, real one, I can bring 3 men. We can raise a cabin in 5 days. You would have shelter before August. Sten said, Thank you. No. Bottle Bjork came herself. She brought a jar of preserves. She sat with Sigrid on the grass and did not try to talk. She just sat. When she got up to leave, she squeezed Sigrid's shoulder. She looked at Sten in the trench. She said, You will do what you will do, Sten Nyberg. But that child needs to eat. She is too thin. Sten climbed out of the trench. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. He said, She eats. Not enough. She eats what she wants. Sten. Bottle. Thank you for the preserves. Bottle looked at him for a long moment. Then she rode away. Sten climbed back into the trench. By the end of June, the perimeter trench was complete. He had removed 6 tons of earth and rock. He had done it alone. He had raised blisters on his hands so many times that his palms were now leather. His back hurt every night. His shoulders hurt every morning. He was down to 150 pounds. He had been 180 at Christmas. He did not care. He was moving. He was moving toward the thing he had promised. Sigrid watched him work every day. She brought him water. She brought him bread. She sat on the pile of dirt, with the book of Malin's diagrams open on her lap, and studied the pictures. Her eyes were awake in a way they had not been in 6 months. She was helping him, in the only way she knew how, by being there. He was grateful for it. He was grateful to her. July was for stone. He hauled it from a rocky outcrop a mile east of the cabin. He built a travois. He hitched the horse to it. He loaded it with stones as heavy as he could lift. He walked the horse back to the site. He unloaded. He walked back for another load. He did this 10 hours a day, 12 on the long days. He selected each stone. Flat surfaces, dense material. He rejected anything that was too soft or too round. He wanted granite. He wanted basalt. He wanted stone that would hold heat the way Matthias Sundman's forge had held heat. Sigrid began to help. The medium stones, the ones a strong 12-year-old could lift. She would walk beside the travois. She would help load. She was strong for her size. She was Anders' daughter, and Anders had been a strong man. She worked without complaint. And once, on a very hot afternoon in mid-July, when Sten had been lifting a large stone that was almost too heavy for him, and it had slipped and had almost crushed his foot, and he had said a Swedish word that men were not supposed to say in front of children. Sigrid had made a sound. A small sound. Not a laugh. Almost a laugh. Sten had looked at her. She had looked away, her cheeks red. But he had heard it. The first sound she had made in 7 months. That was not weeping. He had turned back to the stone. He had not said anything. He had not wanted to scare it away. But he had felt something crack open in his chest. Not the grief. The grief was still there. The grief would always be there. something else, something like hope. By early August, he was laying the foundation walls. He worked from the bottom of the trench upward. He fitted each stone against its neighbor. He used the least mortar he could. He wanted the stones themselves to lock together, tight and heavy and solid. He wanted a wall that would hold heat the way Malin's grandmother's wall had held heat. He was slow. He was very slow. He would sometimes spend an hour placing a single large stone, turning it, trying it, rejecting it, trying another. Sigrid watched him with what he thought might be growing impatience. But she never said anything. She never gestured. She just watched. The walls rose, 18 inches thick. That was the number Malin had written in her book. 18 inches. Old Malin's rule. By the middle of August, the walls stood above the ground. A rectangle of stone, 16 feet by 20, rising a foot and a half above the earth. The trench beside them, empty. The pile of dirt he had dug, still there. Everything about it looked strange. More neighbors came. More head shaking. Rasmus came again. He stood at the edge of the walls. He walked around them. He looked inside at the empty pit. He said, "Nyberg, you are building a swimming pond. A dry one, but a swimming pond." Sten did not answer. Nils came. He stood beside Sten. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sten, this is not going to work. You know that, don't you?" Sten said, "It will work. How do you know?" "Because my wife's grandmother built one in Sweden, and she never lost a child to the cold." Nils looked at him. Nils had not known that. Nils had thought Sten was making this up, improvising, building something out of his own broken head. Nils said, "Sten, yes. Is this in a book?" "Yes. May I see?" Sten went to the small tin box he had begun to keep at the site. He took out Malin's book. He opened it to the diagram. He handed it to Nils. Nils looked at it. Nils was a plain man, but he was not a stupid man. He looked at the diagram. He looked at the wall Sten had built. He looked at the trench. He looked at the piles of stones Sten had gathered. He looked at Sigrid, who was sitting on a rock nearby, watching. He handed the book back. He said, "I will not laugh at you anymore, Sten Nyberg." He got on his horse. He rode home. Sten watched him go. It was the first time, since May, that anyone had looked at what he was building, and not laughed. He turned back to the wall. He picked up the next stone. The bad day came at the end of August. He had been working since first light. He had been trying to place a large cornerstone. It was too heavy for one man. He had known it was too heavy, but he had not wanted to wait. He had not wanted to ask for help. He had wanted to move it himself. He had lifted it. He had gotten it to the wall. He had tried to lower it into place. And his back had gone. Something in his lower back had failed. Simply failed. He had felt it go. He had dropped the stone. The stone had missed his foot by 3 inches. He had fallen to his knees. He had knelt there in the dirt. He had not been able to stand up. Sigrid had come running. She had knelt beside him. She had put her hand on his back. He had looked at her, and something in him had broken. Not physically. His back was going to be fine. It was going to hurt for a week. He would be back to work in 3 days. Something else. He was tired. He was so tired. He had been working 16 hours a day for 4 months. And he was tired. And he was not sure. He was not sure. He was not sure he could do this. He sat down in the dirt. He put his face in his hands. He wept. He wept in the dirt beside a stone wall that was not yet high enough to shelter a chicken, and he wept for Malin, and he wept for Marit, and he wept for himself, and he wept because he did not know if he could keep going. Sigrid stood beside him. She did not touch him. She waited. When his shoulders stopped shaking, she stepped forward. She put her small hand on the top of the wall, on the largest stone he had placed. She left her hand there. She looked at him. She nodded. Once. Firm. Certain. The same nod she had given when he had shown her the diagram in May. Keep going. That was what the nod said. She had not spoken. She would not speak. But the nod said what needed to be said. Her hand on the stone said it. Keep going. I am with you. The stone is going to remember. Aunt Malin is going to be right. Keep going. Sten looked at her. He said, Sigrid, just her name. She nodded again. He stood up. His back screamed. He got up anyway. He walked to the stone. He tried again. By September, the foundation walls were complete. By late September, he had gathered the fill. Sawdust from Rasmus hauled 6 times in the wagon. Pine needles. Moss from the north sides of the trees. Charcoal from old fire pits. He mixed it. He spread it in the cavity between the walls. He tamped it down. Not too tight. Loose enough for the air to hold. That was what old Malin had known. Air was what held the warmth. By early October, the joists were laid. 14 logs. Debarked. Notched. Pegged to the walls. 16 inches apart. He drilled every hole himself. He drove every peg. Sigrid held the pegs while he swung the mallet. She had good hands. Steady hands. By mid-October, the floor was laid. 2-inch pine planks. Bought from Rasmus at a price that took the last of Sten's furs. He laid them perpendicular to the joists. He nailed them with square-cut nails. 3 nails at every joist. Every 8th plank pegged, not nailed, so he could lift it later. The way old Malin had done it. He stood on the finished floor. He looked down. His feet were on a wooden platform that was 2 feet above the ground. Below him, sawdust and pine needles and moss and charcoal, packed loose in a cavity between 18-inch walls of granite and basalt. Below that, the earth. He stomped his boot on the plank. Solid. Sigrid was watching from the yard. She had a shawl around her shoulders. The air was getting cold. He said, Sigrid, kom och kan. Sigrid, come and feel. She climbed up. She stood beside him on the floor. She stomped her small boot. She looked at him. Almost a smile. The storm came in the first week of November. He had not yet raised the walls. He had not yet built the roof. The floor sat there in the open, naked, 2 feet above the ground. The stone walls of the foundation rising around it like a low fence. Everything he had built in 6 months of labor exposed to the sky. He had known the storm was coming. He had known it that morning. The pressure had dropped. The air had turned. The horses had been restless. He had known. But he had thought he had until dark. He was wrong. The storm hit at 3 in the afternoon. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in an hour. The wind came screaming down the valley. The first snow was not snow. It was ice. Small hard pellets that stung the face. Then the snow. Then more snow. He was on the floor of the new cabin. He was covering it with canvas. He had 4 canvases. It was not enough. He was tying them down with rope. His fingers were going numb. He could not get the knots right. Sigrid was at the old cabin. He had told her to stay inside. She had stayed inside. He could see the smoke rising from the chimney through the driving snow. He worked. The wind ripped one of the canvases loose. He grabbed it. He fought it back into place. He tied it again. Better this time. The knot held. The second canvas ripped. Not loose. Ripped. Torn straight through by the wind. He grabbed the pieces. He tried to weight them with stones. The stones were too small. The pieces flew away. He stood on the floor of his cabin in the driving snow. He was going to lose everything. Everything he had built. The floor was going to be soaked. The sawdust below was going to be soaked. The wood was going to swell and warp. 6 months of work. 6 months. Ruined in one afternoon. Because he had not built the roof fast enough. Because he had spent too long on the foundation. Because he had. He did not know what to do. He stood on the floor, and the snow came down, and the wind screamed, and he did not know what to do. Then Sigrid was there. He had not seen her come. She had walked from the old cabin. Through the storm. She had brought his heaviest oilcloth. The one he used for the wagon. She had dragged it. It was almost too big for her to carry. She looked at him. She held out the oilcloth. He understood. He took it. He unfolded it. It was enormous, big enough to cover most of the floor. He and Sigrid together fought it into place. He weighted it with the largest stones from the foundation pile. She helped him, her small hands red with cold, her braid whipping in the wind. They tied it down. They tied it down together. When it was done, they stood on the covered floor. The wind pulling at them, the snow coming sideways, the oilcloth beneath their feet flapping and holding. Sten was shaking, cold, exhausted, almost past being able to stand. Sigrid took his hand. She led him back through the storm, to the old cabin. She opened the door. She pushed him inside. She closed the door behind them. The fire was burning. She had fed it. It was warm. She took his coat. Her small hands. She took his coat off him. She hung it up. She got the blanket from his pallet. She brought it to him. She put it around his shoulders. He looked at her. He said, "Tack. Thank you." She looked back at him. She did not speak, but she reached up. She touched his cheek, just for a moment, the way a mother touches a child. And then she went to feed the fire. Sten sat by the hearth. He watched her, 13 soon, Anders' daughter, Malin's niece, his last living family. Outside, the storm screamed against the walls. The old cabin held. It was still adequate. It would hold through the storm. And the new cabin, the strange one, with the stone foundation, and the raised wooden floor, and the cavity full of sawdust and pine needles. The new cabin was covered. Because a mute 13-year-old girl had known what to do. She had known. Sten closed his eyes. He thought about Malin. He thought, "You are seeing this, aren't you? You are seeing what your niece just did." He thought, "We are going to finish this cabin." He thought, "And when the deep cold comes, when it comes for us the way it came for you, we are going to be ready. I promise you, Aldrig Mare." The storm blew itself out in the night. By dawn, the sun was shining on a valley covered in 6 inches of new snow. Sten went out to the new cabin at first light. The oilcloth had held. The floor beneath was dry. The sawdust cavity was intact. He had lost the 2 canvases that had torn, but he had not lost the cabin. He worked through November. He raised the walls, log walls, notched at the corners. He did it faster than he had done anything all summer. He had to. Winter was coming. He had 2 months of work left, and 6 weeks to do it. He worked from before dawn to after dark. Sigrid brought him meals. She fed the fire in the old cabin. She waited. By the 3rd week of November, the walls were up. The roof was on. The door was hung. The window was shuttered. He had built the fireplace into the north wall, from the same careful granite he had used in the foundation. He stood in the finished cabin. Bare, rough, unfinished on the inside, but enclosed. Sigrid stood beside him. He said, "Vi flitter in a morgen. We move in tomorrow." She nodded. He said, "Och Senator Vi ska tanda elden. Och som din master mormor hed rat. And then, we are going to light the fire, and see if your great-grandmother was right." Sigrid looked at the floor. She looked at the walls. She looked at him. And this time, she smiled. Just a small one. Just for a moment. But she smiled. They moved in on the 22nd of November. The morning was cold. 15 degrees. Wind out of the north. Sigrid carried her own small bundle of clothes across the yard. Sten carried the trunk. Malin's trunk. He set it against the wall where the pallets would go. He set the small leather book on top of the trunk. Then he built the first fire. He knelt at the new fireplace. He laid the kindling the way Malin had taught him. The way her father had taught her. Cross sticks. Small tinder at the bottom. Larger sticks laid over. He struck the flint. He blew. The tinder caught. The kindling caught. The first log caught. Fire filled the firebox. Sten sat back on his heels. Sigrid stood in the doorway watching. The flames climbed. The smoke drew clean up the chimney. Not one wisp came into the room. He had built the flue right. He looked up at Sigrid. He said, "Vi är hemma. We are home." She did not answer, but she stepped inside. She closed the door behind her. She was home. The first day he did not watch the air. He watched the floor. He walked across it in his stocking feet. He knelt on it. He put his palm flat against the planks. Cool. Neutral. Not warm. Not cold. An hour later he checked again. Still cool. But different. Not stone cool. Wood cool. A living cool. 2 hours in. 3 hours. The fire burning hard in the fireplace. He knelt at the far corner of the cabin. He put his palm on the plank. Warm. Not much. But warm. His breath caught. He crossed the floor to the other corner. He knelt again. Warm there too. Not just near the fireplace. All the way across. He lifted one of the pegged floor planks. The one closest to the wall. He set it aside. He lay down on the floor. He put his hand into the cavity. Down into the sawdust and pine needles and moss. The insulation was warm. Actually warm. 2 inches down. 6 inches down. Warm. He put his hand deeper. Down to the stone at the bottom. To the granite of the foundation wall. The stone was warm. Just like Malin had said. Just like old Malin had said. Just like a woman in Skåne 2 generations dead had known, when she built her house in 1780, that no one had believed a woman could know about heat. Sten lay on the floor of his cabin, with his hand in the cavity below. He wept quietly, not for grief this time, for her, for all of them, for every woman who had ever known something and been told to be quiet. Sigrid stood over him. She did not ask what was wrong. She could see there was nothing wrong. She could see something else. She sat down beside him on the floor. She put her hand on his shoulder. She left it there. He let the fire die that night. On purpose. He needed to know. He fed the fire hard, until 9 in the evening. He added one last big log at 10. He watched it burn down. By midnight it was coals. By 1 in the morning it was ash. The fire was out. Sten lay on his pallet on the floor. He was fully awake. He was watching the cabin. The air cooled. Slowly at first. Then faster. He could see his breath by 2 in the morning. The temperature at head height was dropping. 45, 40, 38. But the floor beneath him, the floor stayed warm. He put his hand on the plank beside his cheek. Still warm. He put his hand on the plank at his feet. Still warm. He crawled across the floor to the far wall. Still warm. Everywhere. Every plank. Outside the cabin it was 18 below zero. Inside the cabin the air was 38 degrees. The floor was still warm to the touch. 56 degrees of difference. With no fire. Sten sat on the warm floor in the cold air, and he understood, for the first time in his life, what it meant to build something that worked. Sigrid was sleeping on her pallet. He looked over at her. She was breathing slow and even. She was not curled up cold. She was not wrapped in every blanket. She was lying on her back, with one arm thrown up, over her head. Warm. Comfortable. The way a child sleeps when a child is safe. Sten closed his eyes. He thought, Malin. She is warm. Your niece is warm. She is going to live through this winter. And every winter after. Because of you. He fell asleep on the floor. He did not wake up until dawn. The next 4 weeks were the strangest weeks of his life. He was warm. He had not been warm for a year. Not since Malin. He had lived in the old cabin from December to November, and every day of that year he had been cold. Not shivering cold. Not dying cold. Just cold. That low, thin, constant cold that lived in the walls of frontier cabins and got into a person's bones and stayed there. The new cabin was warm. Not always the air. The air got cold when the fire went out. But the floor, the walls, the whole structure, something in the bones of the place was warm now. He walked around barefoot in the mornings. He had not done that in a year. He and Sigrid ate their breakfast without their coats on. He had not done that in a year either. Sigrid was different. He noticed it in the second week. She had started to hum, not sing, not speak, Just a soft hum sometimes while she worked. A little tune. He recognized it after a while. It was a lullaby Malin used to sing to Marit. Sigrid must have heard it 100 times in the months she had lived with them. She was humming her aunt's lullaby. In the cabin her uncle had built, from her aunt's book. Sten did not say anything about it. He did not want to scare it away. But he heard it. He heard it every day. He did not tell the neighbors. He did not go to the Bjorks. He did not visit the trading post. He kept to himself. He worked his traps. He hauled wood. He stayed in the cabin. He was not ready. He was not ready to explain it. He was not ready to be looked at. He was not ready to hear another man say, "Well, Nyberg, we will see. If it holds in the real cold." The real cold would come. When it came, it would prove itself. Or it would not. Until then he wanted to sit in his warm cabin, with his niece, and read Malin's book by the fire, and feel the floor warm under his stocking feet. He wanted his wife. He wanted his daughter. He would never have them again. But he had this. He had the thing Malin had left him. And Sigrid was safe. For now that was enough. The cold came on the 18th of December. Sten woke before dawn. He knew before he opened his eyes. The air had changed. That deep silent still, that comes into a valley, when the temperature drops past 40 below, and everything living hunkers down and waits. He got up. He went to the door. He opened it. The cold hit him like a hand across the face. 42 below zero. He knew because he had put his old thermometer outside the new cabin. It still worked at temperatures below 40. He had used it in Minnesota. He could read it in the gray dawn light. 42 below. And falling. He closed the door. Sigrid was awake. She was sitting up on her pallet. She had heard him open the door. She had felt the cold that came in with him. She looked at him. He said, "Det är kallt. It is cold." She nodded. He said, "Vi ska 6 bygde det rat. We are going to see if we built it right." She nodded again. He built the fire hard. The temperature kept dropping through the day. By noon it was 45 below. By 4 in the afternoon, when the sun began to slip behind the western ridge, it was 50 below. By 8 at night, 52. The wind came up, not hard, but steady, out of the north, pushed the cold into everything, into the walls, into the gaps around the door, into the shuttered window. Every cabin in the valley was fighting. Sten knew what was happening out there. He had done it enough times himself. Men were feeding fires hard. Wives were awake in shifts. Children were sleeping piled together on hearths, wrapped in every blanket the family owned. Wood was being burned faster than any man had planned to burn it. The old-timers called this kind of cold the killing cold, because it killed. Every winter, somewhere in the valley or the next valley over, somebody died in a night like this. An old trapper who lived alone. A family whose fire went out. A child too young to be strong. Sten stood at his fireplace. The fire was burning strong. His floor was warm. Sigrid was sitting cross-legged on the floor, with a piece of mending in her lap. Her feet were bare. She had not put on boots since morning. The floor was warm enough. She had noticed. She had taken her boots off after breakfast and had not put them back on all day. Sten watched her. Something in his chest was so full it hurt. At 10 that night, he did the thing he had been building toward for 8 months. He let the fire die. He did not add wood at 10. He did not add wood at 11. He watched the flames burn down. He watched them become coals. He watched the coals lose their glow. By midnight the firebox held nothing but gray ash. The fire was out. 52 below zero outside. The fire was out on purpose. Sten stood in the middle of his cabin. He was fully dressed, ready to build the fire back up in an instant if he needed to, if Sigrid started to shiver, if the floor started to cool. If anything, he waited. He watched the air. His breath was visible. The air had cooled. It was maybe 45 inside now. Cold air on his face. But the floor. He knelt. He put his palm on the plank. Warm. Not fire warm. Not summer warm. but warm. The way a stone is warm at the end of an August day. The way a bread oven is warm 2 hours after the bread comes out. He pulled off his boots. He walked in his stocking feet from one end of the cabin to the other. Warm everywhere. His floor was warm at 52 below. His wife was right. His wife's grandmother was right. Old Malin of Skåne, who had died before Sten was born, who had never learned to read, who had raised 9 children in a house she and her husband had built in 1780, was right about heat. The stone remembered. He sat down on the warm floor. He wept quietly. Silent, not shaking, just tears running down his face. He was tired. He was so tired. He had been fighting for a year, and now the fight was done. He had built the thing. It worked. Sigrid was safe. Sigrid was going to live. He wept until he was empty. Then he lay down on the warm floor. He fell asleep. 52 below zero. On a floor that had no fire. He was woken by fists on the door. Fists. Pounding. Not a knock. Not a proper knock. The pounding of a person who has been pounding for a while and is not stopping. He sat up. He was disoriented for a moment. Where? When? The cabin. His cabin. Sigrid on her pallet. Awake now. Sitting up. Her eyes wide. The fists. Pounding. Someone screaming. A woman's voice. Screaming his name. Nyberg. 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 Öppna. Öppna dörren. Nyberg. Open. Open the door. Bottle Björk. Sten jumped up. He ran to the door. He wrenched it open. Bottle fell into the cabin. She fell. She could not stand. She was carrying a bundle in her arms. A small bundle wrapped in blankets. She fell forward with the bundle held against her chest. Sten caught her. She was frozen. Actually frozen. Her face white. Her lips blue. Ice crusted in her eyelashes. She could not speak. Her mouth was moving, but nothing was coming out. Bottle. Bottle. Bottle, what is it? What? She held out the bundle. He took it. He looked down. A child. A small child. Linnea. Halvar and Bottle's youngest. 5 years old. Not breathing right. Chest rattling. Face blue. Eyes half open. Not seeing. Bottle finally got the words out. She. Pneumonia. 2 days. Halvar. Fire. We tried. She could not finish. Sten understood. He understood in a second. The Björk cabin. The killing cold. The fire in the Björk cabin had not been enough. It had held. But not enough. Not enough for a 5-year-old with pneumonia. Not at 52 below. Bottle had run. 2 miles. In 52 below zero. With her dying child. Because she had looked out the window and seen no smoke coming from Sten Nyberg's chimney, and she had thought Sten Nyberg was already dead. She had thought his cabin was already frozen. She had thought there was no one to run to. She had come anyway, because there was nowhere else to go. Sten shut the door. He looked at Sigrid. Sigrid was already moving. She was pulling blankets off her pallet. She was pulling blankets off Sten's pallet. She was pulling them close to the fireplace, where the floor was warmest. Sten laid Linnea down on the floor. On the warm floor, he tore open the blankets around her. The child was still in her nightclothes. Her small chest was working. Barely working. He put his ear to her mouth. Faint breath. Faint. Sigrid was there. She had the blankets. She was covering the child. Warm blankets. Warm floor beneath. Sigrid tucked the blankets around Linnea's small blue face. Sten built the fire. He built it fast. He built it hard. He threw kindling in. He struck the flint. The tinder caught. He was moving faster than he had ever moved in his life. Because a child was dying on his floor. Because Halvar Björk's 5-year-old daughter was dying on his floor. Because he had built the cabin. He had built the cabin. And now the cabin was going to save this child. Or the cabin was not going to save this child. And he would know. In the next hour. He would know. The fire caught. Bottle was on the floor beside her daughter. She was sobbing. She was pulling Linnea against her chest. She had thought enough to cry. Sten put his hand on her shoulder. He said, "Bottle, the floor is warm. Do you feel it? The floor is warm. She is on the warm floor." Bottle looked up at him. She had not noticed. She had been too frantic to notice. She put her palm flat on the plank beside her. Her mouth opened. She could not speak. She just looked at Sten. Sten said, "It will hold her. It has been holding it all night. The fire has been out for hours. And it is still warm. It will hold her. Bottle. Bottle, look at me. It will hold her." Bottle nodded. Slowly, she lay down on the floor beside her daughter. She wrapped her arm around Linnea. She put her forehead against Linnea's forehead. She whispered something. Sten could not hear what. Sigrid was still moving. Sigrid had built up the fire without being told. She had pulled the wooden bucket close to the hearth. She was pouring water into a small iron pot to warm. She was doing what Malin had taught her to do a year ago, when Malin herself had been dying of the same thing. Sten crossed to her. He knelt down. He said, "Sigrid." She looked at him. He said, "Vi behover mer tra. We need more wood." She nodded. She went to the door. She pulled on her coat. She went out into the 50 below night for wood. 13 years old. Bringing in wood in the killing cold for a child who was dying on the floor. 2 hours. 2 hours of watching. Sten sat on the floor beside Linnea. Bottle beside her on the other side. Sigrid at the fire, feeding it, always feeding it. The cabin warmed. The air went from 45 to 60 degrees. The floor stayed warm. The walls stayed warm. Linnea's breathing. At first it did not change. It stayed rattling, bubbling, wrong. Then, slowly, so slowly Sten was not sure he was really seeing it, the color came back to her lips. Just a little. Just the faintest edge of pink at the corners. Bottle saw it. She made a sound. A small sound. Between a laugh and a sob. Sten reached over. He put his hand on Bottle's shoulder. They watched. Linnea's chest was still working hard. But her lips were pinker. Her forehead, when Bottle pressed her palm to it, was cooler than it had been. She was fighting. She was fighting because the floor was warm. Because her body was not spending everything it had trying to stay warm. Because she could spend it on breathing instead. On living instead. At 3 in the morning, Linnea opened her eyes. She looked up at her mother. She said, in a small croaking voice, "More, mother." Bottle broke. She broke all the way. She pulled her daughter into her arms, and she rocked her, and she sobbed, and she said Linnea's name over and over. Sten had never seen a woman cry like that. Not even Malin at her father's funeral. Not even Malin the night the wolves came near the cabin in the first winter. Bottle Bjork was crying for a child who was going to live. The knock came at 6 in the morning. Not a pounding. A knock. Steady. Hard. Sten opened the door. Halvar Bjork stood in the doorway. He was wrapped in 3 coats. His face was white. His beard was crusted with ice. He had been out searching. He had woken. He had found his wife gone and his daughter gone. He had ridden through the killing cold in the dark. He had ridden 2 miles in 50 below weather with a lantern to see by. He did not speak. He came into the cabin. He looked at the floor. His wife. His daughter sleeping. His daughter breathing. Breathing normally. Not rattling. Halvar's knees gave. He went down. Right there in the doorway. He went to his knees. He crossed his arms over his chest. He bent forward until his forehead touched the plank floor. He did not speak. He did not weep. Not out loud. His shoulders shook. Sten stood there. He did not know what to do. Bottle sat up. She held out her hand to her husband. Halvar crawled across the floor to her. He crawled. He was too broken to walk. He got to his wife and daughter and he pulled them both into his arms and he held them. He said one word. He said Sten's name. Nyberg. Sten said, "She is going to be all right, Halvar." Nyberg. Halvar. Nyberg. He could not say anything else. Just the name. Sten's name. over and over, like a prayer, like an apology, like every laugh he had ever laughed at Sten's foolish hole in the ground for the last 8 months coming out of his mouth, as one word. Nyberg. Sten sat down beside him. He put his arm around Halvar's shoulder. The two men sat there like that, in the strange overbuilt cabin the whole valley had laughed at. On the warm floor, beside Halvar's daughter, who was going to live, because a Swedish woman had written notes in a small leather book in November of 1848, and had died before her husband ever read them. Dawn broke on the 23rd of December. The killing cold began to break with it. By noon the temperature was -30. By dark it was -15. By the next morning only -5. The valley had held. Everyone had lived through the night. But there had been close calls. 2 families had run out of dry wood by dawn. Old Nils Hagen had a frostbitten hand, from cutting wood outside, without gloves at 3 in the morning. Rasmus Ekdahl at the trading post had lost 2 horses in a shed that had not been built tight enough. And the Björk family had almost lost a child. The story got around. The story of Bottle Björk running 2 miles, through 50 below weather, with a dying child in her arms, because she had looked at Sten Nyberg's cold chimney, and thought he was dead, and had gone anyway. The story of what she had found. The story of the warm floor. They came in 1s and 2s at first. Halvar himself first. He came back on Christmas Eve. He brought his other 2 children. He brought a goose bottle had roasted. He brought a jug of hard cider. He said, "May we sit at your fire, Nyberg?" Sten said, "You may sit at my fire, Björk." They sat. The children took off their boots and walked around on the warm floor and would not stop marveling at it. They had never felt anything like it in their lives. The oldest, a boy of 10, sat on the floor and put both his palms flat on the plank and said to his father, "This is not right." His father said, "No, this is right. This is what right is. What we had before was wrong." Then Nils Hagen came the following day. Rasmus Ekdahl came the day after that. He walked around the cabin without speaking. He lifted a pegged floor plank and looked down into the sawdust cavity. He put his hand into the sawdust. He pulled it out. He looked at Sten. He said, "I sold you my garbage, and you made this." Sten said, "My wife made this." Rasmus did not understand. Sten took Malin's book down from the shelf, where he now kept it. He opened it to the diagram. He handed it to Rasmus. Rasmus looked. Rasmus read. Rasmus closed the book. He handed it back. He looked at the floor. He looked at Sten. He looked at Sigrid, who was sitting quietly by the fire, with a piece of mending. He said, "I owe you an apology, Nyberg." Sten said, "No." "Yes. No, Ekdahl. You owe her an apology." "My wife. She is on the hill. You can go tell her." Rasmus was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. He walked out of the cabin. He walked up the hill through the snow. He stood at Malin's grave for a long time. Sten watched him through the window. When Rasmus came back down, he did not speak. He just put his hand on Sten's shoulder. He nodded. He rode home. Word spread. By February, 6 families in the valley had asked Sten to help them build cabins like his. He said yes to all of them. He did not ask for payment. He did not ask for anything. He gave them the diagram from Malin's book. He explained the 3 layers. He explained the stone. He explained the sawdust. He explained the floor. He said again and again, "This is not my design. This is my wife's grandmother's design. From Skåne, from a village called Löddeköpinge. In 1780, a woman named Malin Andersdotter built the first one. My wife was named for her. He wanted her name in the story. He wanted old Malin's name in the story too. He wanted every woman who had ever known something to be named. He was 35 years old. He had lost everything. He had built one strange cabin, and he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure the women who had known heat did not go unnamed. Sigrid began to speak again in the spring. Not all at once. Small things at first. In April, she asked Sten to pass the salt at supper. He almost dropped the bowl. He passed it. He did not comment. He did not want to make her regret it. In May, she said, "God Morgon," when he came in from the traps. In June, she asked him a question about a book she was reading. She said, "Farber. Vad betyder det har det?" Uncle, what does this word mean? Sten did not know the answer. He had never learned to read English well, and Malin's books were mostly in Swedish. But he sat with her on the floor beside the fire, and they worked it out together. Slowly, guessing. She smiled when they figured it out. She smiled a lot that summer. She was 14. She was going to be all right. Sten stayed in the valley for 3 more years. He built cabins. He built one for the Bjorks the summer of 1850, right next to their old cabin. Halvar and Bodil moved in October. Their children walked around barefoot on the warm floor for a week, and would not put shoes on. Bodil cried when she felt it under her feet. She said to Sten, "I did not know we were living cold. All my life. I did not know we were living cold, until I felt this floor." Sten built one for Nils Hagen in the summer of 1851. He built one for a new family that had come into the valley that spring, a Norwegian couple with 4 children. He built one for himself and Sigrid on a better site a little higher up the hill with a bigger window and a proper attic room for Sigrid. By 1852, 6 cabins in the valley had thermal floors. None of them lost anyone that winter. None of them lost anyone the winter after that. The valley began to change. Not in ways a passing traveler would have noticed. The cabins looked strange from the outside. Raised on stone. Overbuilt. But inside, mothers stopped waking up in shifts to feed the fire. Children stopped sleeping in piles on the hearth. Old men and old women, who had been slowly dying by inches from the cold, began to live longer. In the summer of 1852, Sten and Sigrid left Wyoming. The fur trade was collapsing. Beaver were gone from the streams. The traders were closing up. Men who had lived 20 years in the mountains were going back east or going to Oregon. Sigrid was 16. She wanted to be a teacher. She had told Sten so, one evening in the spring, sitting on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set behind the western ridge. She had said, "Farber, I want to teach children to read. In a schoolhouse. Somewhere with a schoolhouse." Sten had said, "Then we will go where there is a schoolhouse." They had made the decision together. They packed the wagon. Sten sold his traps. He sold most of his tools. He kept his carpenter's tools. He kept Malin's small leather book, wrapped in oilcloth, in the false bottom of the trunk. He kept the drawing of the cabin. He kept the recipes. He kept everything of hers. He sold the cabin to a Swedish family named Lindquist, who had come into the valley the previous fall. The father was a widower with 2 young daughters. Sten spent 3 days teaching him how the floor worked, how to maintain the sawdust cavity, how to feed the fire during the day so the stones charged with heat, how to know when to add wood at night and when to let the fire go. The Lindquist man wept a little when Sten handed him the key. Not for the cabin. For the wife the cabin was going to save. Not that day, but someday. Some cold December night 10 years from then, when Lindquist would fall asleep by the fire the way Sten had fallen asleep, and would wake up to find his second wife still breathing beside him. Because of a floor. Because of a book. Because of a woman in Skåne in 1780. Sten and Sigrid rode out of the valley in July. They stopped at Malin and Marit's graves before they went. Sten had cleared the site the week before. He had cut the grass. He had laid fresh wildflowers. He had built a small stone marker himself, using granite from the same outcrop, where he had gathered the foundation stones 3 years before. On the marker he had chiseled 2 names. Malin Nyberg, 1819, 1848. Marit Nyberg, 1845, 1848. Below the names, in Swedish, he had chiseled, Galvet minns the floor remembers you. He and Sigrid stood at the marker for a long time. Sigrid put her hand on top of it. She said in Swedish, Master, tack, and thank you. Sten did not say anything. He had said everything already. He had said it every day for 3 years by building. He had said it every time a woman in the valley walked barefoot on her own warm floor in December. He had said it every time a child in the valley slept, through the killing cold without shivering. He put his hand on the marker beside Sigrid's. Then they walked down the hill together. They got on their horses. They rode east. They did not look back. They did not need to. Malin was not on that hill. Malin was in every cabin in the valley that had a warm floor. Malin was going to stay there long, after Sten and Sigrid were gone. Sten and Sigrid settled in Oregon. Sten built a small farm on the Willamette River. He grew wheat. He kept a milk cow. He built a house with a thermal floor, of course. He built it the first summer they arrived, before he even broke ground for the fields. In 1854, when he was 40 years old, Sten married a woman named Ingeborg Solberg. She was a widow with a small son. She was quiet. She had a good laugh when she laughed, which was not often at first, and then more often as the years went by. Sten loved her, not the way he had loved Malin. That kind of love only happens once in a life. But he loved her, and she loved him, and they lived together on the farm for 35 years. Sigrid became a teacher. She taught at a one-room schoolhouse in a town called Milton, 40 miles from Sten's farm. She married a Norwegian farmer named Bergman in 1856. She had 4 children. She lived to be very old. Sten died in 1889. He was 75 years old. He died in the house he had built on the Willamette, on a warm floor, in the spring, with Ingeborg beside him and Sigrid, who had come down from Milton holding his hand. His last words were in Swedish. He said, "Malin, Marit, jag kommer, Malin, Marit, I am coming." The cabin in the Wyoming Valley stood for 74 more years. The Lindquist family lived in it until 1889. A family named Olsen bought it and lived in it until 1912. A family named Larson bought it after that. They lived in it until 1923. In 1923, the Larsons moved out. They were building a modern house nearby with steam heat and electric lights and plumbing brought up from a well. They planned to tear the old cabin down. But before they tore it down, a professor from the University of Wyoming heard about the cabin. He had heard from a very old man who had once been a small boy in that valley that there were cabins in that country with strange floors that stayed warm without fire. The professor came out to look. His name was Dr. Emmett Halloway. He was 56 years old. He was a professor of civil engineering. He had been building things for 30 years, and he knew the standard theory of thermal mass, and he had never in his life seen it applied to a residential structure in the American West before the 20th century. He arrived in the valley in August of 1923. He walked through the empty cabin. He knelt on the floor and looked at the plank fit. He took a pegged plank up. He looked into the cavity below. The sawdust and moss and pine needles, filled 74 years earlier by a man named Sten Nyberg, were still there, dry, loose, still doing their work. He crawled down into the cavity himself. He put his hand on the granite of the foundation. He came out. He sat on the floor and he did not speak for a long time. He said at last to the young man who had guided him out to the valley, "This is remarkable." The young man said, "My grandfather knew the man who built it." Halloway said, "Do you know his name?" The young man said, "Nyberg. Sten Nyberg. He was a Swede. He built it after his wife died." Halloway wrote the name down. He came back 3 more times that summer. He measured the cabin. He photographed it. He wrote a paper about it, which was published in an engineering journal in the spring of 1924. He called the paper a case study in vernacular thermal mass construction. Wyoming Territory, 1849. In the paper, he named the design the Nyberg system. Sigrid read the paper. She was 88 years old. She lived in Milton, Oregon. She had been a widow for 12 years. Her 4 children were grown. Her 9 grandchildren were grown. She had 2 great-grandchildren. Her granddaughter, who was a schoolteacher like she had been, had mailed her the paper, because the granddaughter had seen the name Nyberg in the title, and had thought her grandmother might want to see it. Sigrid read the paper twice. She sat in her rocking chair by the window of the small house her son had built for her. She held the paper on her lap. She looked out at the garden. She said, out loud, though no one was in the room to hear it, "Farber, de vet, uncle, they know." Then she said, "Master, de vet, and they know." The Larsens did tear the cabin down. They dismantled it plank by plank. They did it carefully because Holloway had asked them to, and because they had come to feel a certain reverence for the old strange building on their land. When they lifted the last of the floor planks, they found things. In the sawdust cavity near the north wall, they found a small leather-bound book, wrapped in oilcloth, preserved by the dry insulation for 74 years. When they opened it, they found Swedish handwriting. A woman's hand, recipes and household notes, and a diagram of a stone foundation. They also found a small child's shoe, a single shoe, brown leather, the size of a shoe that would fit a 3-year-old. They did not know what it was, but Sten Nyberg had known. He had placed it there himself on a summer morning in 1849, when the foundation was still open to the sky, and no one had been watching. He had knelt beside the stone. He had lifted a corner of the sawdust. He had laid the shoe underneath. He had said something in Swedish that no living person had heard. Then he had covered it up, and he had built the floor over it. And the floor had held it safe for 74 winters. The shoe stayed with the book. They stayed together. The way she had stayed, with her mother in the grave up on the hill. The way Malin had stayed with Marit under the earth for all the years since. The floor remembered her. The floor remembered them both. A long, long time,